Today we're going to be looking at the third of the three exile poems, and by exile poems it's because they all deal with the theme of exile, that we see in the Exeter book. In this particular piece called The Wife's Lament, we see the role of women for the first time. You know, the Anglo-Saxons were obviously a warrior culture. Women were not warriors at this time. However, what we do see in this case is the voice of a woman from this culture. I mean, they married. They had babies, so women had to be around, and so it's just kind of a gem in that regard. During this time, often women were used as what they would call a peace weaver between warring tribes. You know, if you wanted to show a link between two nations, I say nations, tribes, and you might say, okay, my daughter can marry one of your sons. And so that role is something that was not uncommon for Anglo-Saxon women to serve. What's particularly interesting about this piece is that it also relates to that idea of what your home is. In this case, we talked about three important Anglo-Saxon social bonds: your relationship to your lord or your king, your kin, your family, and then your marriage. Home for a woman would be with the idea of her social connection to her husband. There was not a lot of independence for women at all at this time, but nonetheless, we do see that the voice of this particular poem does have a bit of independence in it, even if that didn't play much of a role in her society. One thing you're going to note is another element of Anglo-Saxon poetry we haven't touched upon yet, but we have actually seen. So far we've talked about the use of alliteration. Remember, these stories were told orally by word of mouth or by mouth at mead halls or performed and such, and then they were recorded later by monks and more literate people of the church. So we talked about alliteration being a sound effect of sorts that would cause some kind of interesting trick to keep your attention. We talked about kennings, which are 2 to 3 word renamings of something. Those renamings often offer some insight into the thing that's being renamed. A modern example would be like the phone being a conversation communicator. In The Wanderer, Warden of Men was used as a kenning to rename God. It didn't have to say it was God. They called it the Warden of Men, but it also gave insight into the role that God plays, which is like a supervisor of sorts in the Christian belief system. We saw the whale's home in The Seafarer, I think it was, or Whale Road, one of those two. Today, I'm going to highlight what's called a caesura, okay? A caesura is a rhythmic pause in a line of poetry. It's sometimes indicated by a space in the line, as I'm going to show you from The Wanderer yesterday and The Wife's Lament today, or it might be emphasized through punctuation, which we will see in Beowulf and we have seen in The Seafarer. So let me highlight for you The Wanderer, which we read yesterday. Okay. This gap right here, let me zoom in for you, is evidence of the rhythmic pause that the storyteller, the traveling storyteller, the shop, S-C-O-P, also called a bard, would have had in the cadence of him singing this story song. So if you're going to hear it. Off to the wanderer, rhythmic pause. Weary of exile, cometh God's pity, pause. Compassionate love, though woefully toiling on wintry seas, with churning oar in the icy wave, homeless and helpless, he fled from fate. Okay, this physical space, that's our caesura. And I'm going to show you, I didn't read The Wife's Lament yet. Well, it's not highlighting. But you can see, you're going to see this space in it, and that you're going to hear the rhythmic pause when I read it in a moment. I make this song about me, full sadly my own wayfaring. I, a woman, tell what griefs I had since I grew up. You're going to see that physical space. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Ms. Gerst, I don't remember seeing that in The Seafarer. Well, they didn't actually physically show the break, but you'll often see, and like you'll see in Beowulf, that it's conveyed through the use of punctuation. And even though I haven't done separate grammar lessons this year, I always kind of say like a period is a stop sign. A comma is like let's slow down and then keep going. So the punctuation of the comma kind of accomplishes the same effect visually that the caesura would have had, as a big space in the line. This tale is true and mine. It tells how the sea took me swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain, showed me suffering in 100 ships, in 1,000 ports. Again, there's that comma, that break in the middle. You see periods and commas will fall frequently in those lines. That's the rhythmic pause. Even though we don't physically see a caesura here, it does still kind of translate when you hear it. So that is one thing I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, the Wife's Lament is like such a great little poem. It's so incredibly rare to hear a woman's voice in much of this time period. So it was considered important enough to be considered a voice and part of the song. And I think that's a testament to the Anglo-Saxons, perhaps a bit, in recognizing the voice of a woman in one of the songs they would sing. Notice this poem actually has very little Christian influence. It's probably very close to its original version, because remember, the literate people of the church, the monks, would be adding these elements to it. So the fact that that's absent is probably an indicator that it's close to its original form. Some important thoughts just before we go ahead and read it. I want you to think, and we're going to talk about these in class when you're in person next, or as part of your remote lesson on the Cohort B day. I want you to think about how the speaker of the Wife's Lament might compare to the speakers of the Seafarer and the Wanderer in terms of their conditions, the condition they're in, the circumstances, the mood, and the attitude toward what they have lost or are missing. And then maybe a larger question is maybe just, it's interesting to consider maybe what degree gender did play in Anglo-Saxon life, and in what ways the condition of an Anglo-Saxon woman might be more or less desirable than that of the men. So let's go ahead and read this poem. I'll do a little bit of explanation. You're going to see that you have a worksheet in which it's relatively short and straightforward, but just because I'm not asking a question about every little thing I point out does not mean that it's not important for you. Let me open. I don't know. Let me zoom out. Okay. The Wife's Lament, translated by Anne Stanford. I make this song about me full sadly my own wayfaring. I, a woman, tell what griefs I had since I grew up, new or old. Never more than now, ever I know, the dark of my exile. First my Lord went out away from his people over the wave tumult. There's a kenning, that's a tumultuous means like it's rough. The wave tumult is the ocean. I grieved each dawn, wondered where my Lord, my first on earth, might be. Then I went forth, a friendless exile, to seek service in my sorrow's need. I don't know what those lines mean, 9 and 10. It's a bit vague. What does it mean to go out to seek service because you're sad? Okay, line 11. My man's kinsmen began to plot by darkened thought to divide us two. That's his family. So we most widely in the world's kingdom live wretchedly, and I suffered longing. So his family, did something to plot to divide us. Did it have something to do with whatever lines 9 and 10 mean? I have no idea. But it's a fascinating thing that scholars will debate. Line 15. My Lord, her husband, commanded me to move my dwelling here. I had few loved ones in this land or faithful friends. For this my heart grieves, that I should find the man well matched to me, hard of fortune, mournful of mind, hiding his mood, thinking of murder. What? Is he thinking of killing her? What's happening right now? We don't know much about the dwelling and where here is yet, but we will get some details. Blithe was our bearing. Often we vowed that but death alone would part us two, naught or nothing else. But this is turned around now, as if it never were our friendship. I must far and near bear the anger of my beloved. The man sent me out to live in the woods, under an oak tree, in this den in the earth. Ancient this earth hall. I am all longing. A den in the earth is like a cave. And listen to this environment in which she lives. Now, it may just be that her view is so clouded, kind of like this veil of depression is over her, because to be honest, it's not going to be good for you if you're alone living in a cave and not with the security of a community. The valleys are dark, the hills high, the yard overgrown, bitter with briars, a joyless dwelling. Full oft the lack of my Lord seizes me cruelly here. Friends there are on earth living beloved, lying in bed, while I at dawn am walking alone under the oak tree through these earth halls. There I may sit the summer-long day. There I can weep over my exile, my many hardships. Hence I may not rest from this care of heart which belongs to me ever, nor all this longing that has caught me in this life. This last stanza gives us some insight into her attitude toward her husband. She's bitter. I think it's interesting. It says, may that young man be sad-minded always, hard his heart's thought, while he must wear a blithe bearing with care in the breast a crowd of sorrows. May on himself depend all his world's joy. Be he outlawed far in a strange folkland, that my beloved sits under a rock cliff rimed with frost, a lord dreary in spirit, drenched with water in a ruined hall. My lord endures much care of mind. He remembers too often a happier dwelling. Woe be to them that for a loved one must wait in longing. So this last part here, she's basically saying, you know what? I hope he's always sad and he's got to act like he's blithe and happy but have a chest full of sorrow. I hope he's the only one that can make himself happy and no one else does. I hope that he's outlawed in a faraway land, sitting on a rock, rimed in frost, drenched in water in a ruined hall, and that he worries a lot and keeps remembering a happier time. That's hilarious to me. You can see the little footnote on your page here. She's mourning the loss here of, her union with her husband, getting to live together in a happier time. But again, I talked about earlier the importance of community. Like, imagine this girl's, prospects if she's living in a cave alone, still technically married, but sent out from her husband. The husband would have had a lot of power. The wife had little social power at this time. It's definitely not, it's pretty grim. So you're going to see a place to fill in the notes. The Peace Weaver goes up here that I talked about. And then you're going to see that I ask you about the type of exile present. Did she choose this circumstance or was it forced upon her? What were the circumstances that caused this? You need to mention not only about the husband, but about the family's role in it. What she's mourning the loss of. And then I want to have you look for a line of alliteration and cite the line numbers. And then an example of a kenning. And you're going to write that out too. And I made reference to it earlier if you were listening. So, tomorrow, the next day you come in person, please bring your vocabulary book. Nothing is due in it. Just bring the book to class. We're going to go over Unit 2, vocabulary. I'm going to talk about a little tweaking I'm going to make to the assessment that will take place next week. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good day.